by leaving the United States simply creates the space that will be filled by another state member of the so-called Western group. And the international community has been informed that very soon the General Assembly will organize an ad hoc election to elect a member of the Western group to replace the United States at the Human Rights Council, so to fulfill the 47 membership which is required by the law of the Human Rights Council. In the Human Rights Council, a state that is not a member is automatically an observer state. So a state cannot be something else. If a state is a member of the United Nations, and as you know, all the states recognized by the United Nations are members of the United Nations, with the exception of the Holy See, which is observer of the United Nations. But if a state is not a member of the Human Rights Council, is automatically observer of the Human Rights Council and remains obviously member of the United Nations. According to the rules of procedures, the only difference between a member state of the Human Rights Council and an observer state of the Human Rights Council is the voting procedure. Though this is important, it is a tiny part of the work of the Human Rights Council, just the voting procedure. So to get to the concrete legal consequences, by leaving the membership of the Human Rights Council, the United States cannot call for a vote and cannot participate in votes of resolutions. In other words, the United States will not vote on the most important or contentious resolutions, including those on Syria, on Israel, on Palestine conflicts, including resolutions that affirm values shared by the United States, such as rights of different minorities and others, and values that are contested by other states. So this means a little bit leaving the space of a potential good vote by leaving the Council. So it appears that the United States has scored an own goal, speaking about goals by these days, or does anything else lie behind its decision? There is also another consequence, is that the United States cannot call for a vote. And this, paradoxically, can be a good thing. And I just want to give you one example. Right now, probably half an hour ago, the Human Rights Council adopted the first ever resolution called Human Rights and the Regulation of Civilian Acquisition, Possession and Use of Firearms. And this resolution was just adopted right now by consensus, and obviously you can watch the webcast because the sessions of the Human Rights Council are webcast. This is for the first time that the Council has such a resolution. It's a part of speculation, but I can almost bet that if the United States were active member of the Human Rights Council, they would have either called for a vote or anyway created problems against the consensual acquisition of this resolution, which is presented in the Human Rights Council for the first time. So I would not go that far away to say that it's a positive consequence of the United States leaving the Human Rights Council, but it's true that some resolutions could be adopted in a more consensual way in the absence of the United States, and I'm speaking for good resolutions, so to say. The other side of the story is that the Human Rights Council also creates and has responsibility for the so-called human rights mechanisms, which is a word in the Human Rights Council jargon, which is very unclear for external people, but this means the special rapporteurs of the United Nations, special procedures, universal periodic review, for example. To give you one example again, the United States are already scheduled for their third UPR review in February 2020, in accordance with the tentative timetable. I think today it would be a speculation to say that they will not go at the UPR review in February 2020. I'm not even sure whether they themselves know it. But legally speaking, if we have to just read their communication leaving the Council, they have communicated that they will not participate in the June session and in the other sessions of the Human Rights Council. So they have never said or communicated that they will not participate in the UPR. For me, this will be a speculation already to decide that they will not go to the UPR. I just wanted to mention also that the Human Rights Council is sort of the victim of its success because this is the most genuinely democratic intergovernmental body in the United Nations. And by this, it obviously challenges the United States supremacy. Why this? Because this is an intergovernmental body where you need to apply through commitments which are published in advance. So to be elected as a member, you have to publish your commitments, and then there is a control about the fulfillment of the commitments of each state which has been elected. So it might be that the commitments which the United States published 1.5 years ago on the website of the General Assembly could not be respected anymore today. Again, do not want to speculate, just throwing questions for discussion. The other thing which happens with the Human Rights Council is that, as you know, members have one vote, and there is no possibility to veto anything, and they do not enjoy any additional privileges. So one state, one vote, that's it. Furthermore, there is no possibility, for example, to prevent the holding of a special session, which again is based on a mathematical formula. According to the regulations of the Human Rights Council, 16 states, any 16 states members of the Human Rights Council can call for a convening of a special session. The moment 16 states call for a convening of a special session, there is a special session, nothing to be done against this. So the conclusion on all this is that there is no legal mechanism to stop special session from happening or to stop a vote to happening and to influence a vote. For example, again, the possibility to impose a veto, for example, which, as you know, the United States and 4 other countries in the world are used to have in the Security Council, for example. So the only way to react against something in the Human Rights Council is a political reaction. Which brings me to my second point, and the last point. Through its spectacular withdrawal, the United States made noisily evident that they disagree with the work of the Human Rights Council. It's clear for everybody. But think about the fact that this reinforces their position should they choose to contest or reopen any Human Rights Council decision at the United Nations General Assembly. So, because the Human Rights Council is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly, the decision and everything which has been decided in Geneva can be reopened or redecided in New York. Since the Council is the subsidiary body of the General Assembly, that's the rule. So, this has happened already in the past. In 2009, for example, with the so-called Goldstone report, which was adopted in Geneva and contested through a resolution in the plenary of the General Assembly. So technically speaking, this reinforces, if somebody wants to contest a decision of the Human Rights Council in New York and has tweeted noisily and unhappily the Human Rights Council in Geneva, this makes the state in a stronger position to do so. So morally and politically, that is easier. So this is relevant with respect to resolutions, any resolution on the Human Rights Council, namely those concerning Israel and other states. And in conclusion, for these reasons, it looks like a political calculation, but not only political, but also legal calculation, the fact to leave the Council. Other legal consequences, just very briefly, is that the United States can contest the budget of the conference services and the Human Rights Council. They can contest any budget which is decided in New York in the General Assembly. And as I said, with respect to UPR and special procedures, they might decide to disengage, but I would not speculate today, and it has not been published and it has not been said by official US authority that they will do so. So I would leave this question of disengagement with human rights mechanisms open.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And with this, I would like to pass over to you, Sarah. And we don't have a large panel, but you have a lot of expertise and different expertise also, as I laid out, as a professor, obviously, as a member of the Human Rights Committee. And also, I think in your institute you have a work stream on human rights in the US, monitoring human rights in the US. So I think the domestic implications would be an interesting point. And obviously the withdrawal, also the ramifications on other processes. And speaking of the UPR, I think also obviously the US UPR is still quite a ways down the road. But for example, the UPR of China is much closer, and non-participation of the US could have some impact over there as well. But with this, I mean, we have questions from the floor. Camelia has put forward questions. Maybe I'll hand it right to you to comment on, share your views, please.
Sure, thank you. And first of all, I'd like to thank Felix and Camelia for organizing this obviously very timely discussion, which I was pleased to participate in. I'm obviously participating in my personal capacity, representing nobody, and with no inside knowledge on this issue. I think I would just start out, though, by saying that the complaints that the U.S. articulated in withdrawing from the Council are complaints that the U.S. has had about the Council and previously about the Human Rights Commission for many years, right? John Bolton voted against the Council in 2006. The Bush administration did not join, and it was a quite complex internal discussion within the Obama administration in 2009 that led to its somewhat reluctant re-engagement with the Council in September of 2009. And I was part of the U.S. delegation that went to the first Human Rights Council session on behalf of the U.S. in 2009, which was also the famous Goldstone Report session, or at least the first one. So these are you know, the concerns about excessive attention on Israel, and Agenda Item 7, the concerns about membership on the Council of gross human rights violators, ineffectiveness of the Council in its inability to address evenly across the board serious human rights situations, the politicization of the Council, the fact that some situations get in the view of the U.S., excessive attention, and some situations get insufficient attention. These are long-standing concerns, and some of them are valid. I mean, the Human Rights Council is not a perfect entity. I would maybe react to Camelia's observation that it's the most democratic multilateral institution. Is democratic in the sense that the members each have a vote, but they're not necessarily democratic governments that are voting, and therefore the outcomes of the Council are not necessarily what we would think of in those terms. So why did the U.S. Withdraw from the Council? Well, Ambassador Haley obviously came through Geneva a year ago and sort of did a shot across the bow. I think that if she had been left to her own devices, she would have wanted to stay in the Council as one of her major platforms. Human rights, at least in Cuba, Iran, formerly in North Korea, and in Venezuela, have been an important part of her agenda as UN ambassador. But I think she was probably motivated by some of her own genuine concern about the Council and also by political forces within the administration to announce the launch of this year-long reform effort, which focused on the General Assembly and which, of course, was never sufficiently grounded or bureaucratically sensitive to have sufficient traction to meaningfully reform a deeply entrenched multilateral institution like the Human Rights Council in a year. So the reform effort didn't succeed, and so she announces at the end the reform hasn't succeeded, and it hasn't succeeded because nobody but the United States is a good actor in this scene. You know, either states are hiding behind the Human Rights Council to protect their own human rights abuses and those of others, or well-meaning democratic states are only willing to wink, wink, nod, nod, criticize the Council behind closed doors that don't have the courage to stand up with the U.S. and fight. But this obviously reflects much deeper themes in this administration about hostility to multilateral institutions and engagement, a go-it-alone attitude by the United States, the intense desire to undo anything that President Obama did. And when John Bolton came back into this administration, it seemed to me that the nail was pretty much in the coffin with respect to the Human Rights Council, because although the administration was not originally populated by people who were ideologically hostile to international law and international institutions, he is one of those people. And there are now more people in the administration with those attitudes than there were. So the U.S. announced that it's going to take its ball and go play somewhere else, right? And apparently the human rights conversation for U.S.-UN will now move to the General Assembly and the Security Council, where, of course, many of these problems are replicated in various ways. So what does it mean? I completely agree with Camelia that the legal implications, essentially, are that the U.S. cannot vote in the Human Rights Council and cannot participate as a member of the Human Rights Council. They're pretty narrow legal implications. The political implications for UN engagement with human rights mechanisms around the Council could be much broader, and I think are at present unknown, right? So John Bolton said, we will no longer fund our share of the Human Rights Council or the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Well, the U.S. is the 5th largest contributor to OHCHR, giving something like $20 million a year, so this would be huge if this were actually true. I have not seen any such official move or announcement, and I don't even know that it's possible to earmark the withdrawal of funds in that way. Will the U.S. attend as an observer? Probably not in the near term, would be my guess. Will they go to side events? Probably not in the near term, if only because people may not know the difference back in Washington between a Human Rights Council side event and an actual session of the Council. What is the relationship with the UPR? Will the U.S. show up for other countries' UPRs? To be determined. Will it show up for its own UPR? Well, that is fortunately some distance away. And the fact that China's UPR is coming up sooner is at least hopeful with respect to political engagement. Likewise, special procedures and OHCHR. It is my understanding, at least, that at present the U.S. remains committed to supporting and engaging with OHCHR. There are questions about its engagement with mechanisms that originated from the Council but now have a life of their own, initiatives, lawmaking, best practices initiatives. I think all of these are politically sensitive issues, and frankly, one of the messages that I would give to this audience is that this is not a good time to be beating up on the United States for its record with respect to engaging with UN human rights mechanisms. This is a really good time to help explain to the U.S. And remind them of the value of these mechanisms for issues that the U.S. cares about, because obviously the Council itself, as flawed as it is, has taken many initiatives with respect to Syria and Sri Lanka and North Korea and so on and so forth that the U.S. wholeheartedly supported, and indeed there was no other multilateral institution that could have responded to those situations. So there is obviously a need for the Council, and the U.S. had interest there. What does it mean for the Council? It means that there is a power and influence vacuum now that will be filled by somebody or nobody, right? I mean, one of the notable things when the U.S. joined the Council under the Obama administration was that the U.S. actually put an enormous amount of human and financial resources into engagement with the Council, trying to build bridges among regional groups in creative ways, for example, around defamation of religions, trying to help the European countries overcome their collective action problems, exercising leadership on human rights issues that the US cared about. All of those initiatives, probably weaker now under this administration, right, because of the more ambivalent engagement with human rights and the destruction of the diplomatic infrastructure in the State Department, just has made it, as a practical matter, more difficult for the US to engage anywhere. But still, I think those were important contributions to the Council that are now being taken away. And the question is, who will fill that? I mean, will China fill that? It leaves Israel more exposed, obviously, in the Council. It can't be the case that Israel actually supported this, regardless what they may say publicly. It will also remove the US as an obstacle on some issues. And the US was likely to be more obstructionist on more issues under this administration than under the last one. I think there is a risk, and this is shared by other representatives of other states that care about the Council, that this will further erode the credibility of the Council over time, because it will end up looking more and more like a highly politicized entity that doesn't really have human rights as a priority. Israel formally cut its ties with the Council in 2012 and then restored them a year later at the strong encouragement of the Obama administration, that was concerned that if Israel decided not to show up for its UPR, that other states would then not show up, would have the excuse not to show up for their UPR review, and that this would erode the UPR process. So now we have a similar question, I think, with respect to the US. And then just finally, I think there is obvious harm to the US. I think it is almost never in the United States' interest, long-term interest, to walk away from a multilateral negotiation or institution. The US did not participate in the Princeton process for negotiating the crime of aggression for 10 years, and then lo and behold got a definition of the crime of aggression that they thought was extremely problematic, but it was very difficult at that point to do anything about it because, you know, where were you then, right? And if the US really genuinely cares about reform of the Human Rights Council, what it should have done is stay and participate in what is actually an ongoing reform effort, rather than sort of try to generate its own sort of instant reform effort and then allow it to fail. So those are just a few reactions, but I'm more than happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Before opening, I would like to throw in maybe two things as well, as you just mentioned also the jeopardizing some long-term strengthening efforts. I mean, I was just reminded of the Russian move we saw in the treaty body discussion. We had a strengthening process underway in Geneva, and Russia cut it short in New York, actually, with a resolution, and now the US potentially doing the same for any review of reform discussions of the Council. So I don't know if anyone might want to address this one. And the other topic, obviously, I think it was one of the questions too, was the impact not only on the Human Rights Council procedures per se, so the UPR and special procedures, but also the treaty bodies. I don't know if you would want to say a word, because I mean, in the press after the withdrawal of the US, there were things to read like the US is withdrawing from their human rights obligations and so on. I think in this setting we don't have to say that this was rubbish, but actually still in terms of the potential implications of engagement that you would see with the treaty bodies, including the one you're sitting on. I don't know if you want to say a word on that first. Sure.
I mean, so this actually reminded me, going back to the point about voting in the General Assembly, I think that the issue of children at the border, the Philip Alston report, I mean, these are near-term political sensitivities for the United States. I don't think this is the motivation for the U.S. to withdraw from the Human Rights Council. They may have, you know, helped tip the hand or influence the timing But this is something that has been churning within the U.S. government, I'm sure, for some time. Likewise, I don't think that they decided to withdraw from the council in order to be able to attack the council from the General Assembly. That may be a side benefit, and perhaps they haven't even fully thought that through. But this is more about the national sovereignty and hostility to multilateralism in general. And of course, we're familiar with a long list of demonstrations of those impulses. With respect to the treaty bodies, as I said, there is no indication that the U.S. Is expanding its hostility to UN human rights mechanisms beyond the Council and beyond membership in the Council at this point. I mean, they nominated someone for the Human Rights Committee election that was held the same week of the announcement of the withdrawal from the Council. So I think there's no reason to assume at this point that those two are connected. And indeed, the withdrawal from the Council could free up the U.S. to actually have more time and human resources to engage positively on other human rights efforts in Geneva, because now they have staff that have new job titles. But there's, of course, the risk that people in Washington won't understand the difference between the Human Rights Council and the Human Rights Committee, and frankly won't really care what the difference is. And in part, it just depends how much particular political impulses manage to grab this ball and run with it. I think it is very, very clear that career people in the U.S. government, throughout the U.S. government in Geneva and in Washington and in New York, and many of the political people understand the value of international and regional institutions and want the U.S. to be able to continue to play a leadership role in them. So I think we shouldn't assume the worst. On the other hand, John Bolton, if we want to go back to him, said, he said that this is one manifestation of the president's much larger view of American sovereignty and American exceptionalism, but more will be coming. So it depends, I think, who gets their wish in this administration.
Thank you. Amelia, did you want to add something else at that point?
That's a very bold promise. No, just really throwing some very more technical remarks. So first of all, the OHCHR, I didn't mention this, the Office of the High Commissioner, because it's in no way related, obviously, service as a secretary to the Human Rights Council, but it's not a mechanism to the Human Rights Council. I've seen in the media, including in Swiss media, that the US, by withdrawing from the Human Rights Council, will withdraw from the OHCHR. That's a pure nonsense. They cannot withdraw from the OHCHR. OHCHR is an office, part of the General Secretariat of the United Nations, so they cannot withdraw, neither join, neither withdraw. They can stop, obviously, the earmarked contribution, because the budget of the OHCHR is composed by a regular budget, which is decided by the United Nations, nothing to do there, and by voluntary contributions, which each and every state decides sovereignly to give or not to give to the OHCHR. It's true they can withdraw this. It's true this will make a lot of harm, but I would argue that this doesn't mean that the whole system of the United Nations is decredibilized. This would go too far away as a conclusion. And the other thing is just, yes, there is a resolution of non-accompanied children, just to answer a question behind. And on this resolution, I've checked, I don't know what is the vote, basically, if there is a vote, but again, the same comment would come like for the firearms resolution, that in the absence of the US, this could be a consensual resolution rather, because as you know, the United States are the only state in the world which did not ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child. That's another remark. And the last remark, if the UPR will be eroded, again, it's a future, but I would argue again that nowadays, 12 years after the creation of the Human Rights Council and the start of the UPR, these mechanisms are somehow more stable and more legitimate. And I remember during the John Bolton and George Bush administration, when the US withdrew again from the Human Rights Council. They were not members, so physically to mark that they were withdrawing, they were sitting in the chairs behind and not in the chairs in front, which was ridiculous, if I can allow myself this remark. But so they withdrew. So the big fear there was that they will not come back to the UPR. They will decriminalize the council, and the council was just a baby. Everything was happening for the first time, so it was very dangerous on this time, you know. So it didn't happen. So now we are in the third cycle of the UPR. We are 12 years later after the creation of the Human Rights Council. There are political consequences, there are consequences on multilateral diplomacy, but just precisely eroding this mechanism, I would say it's less dangerous now than 12 years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, I'm opening up. Please, questions, comments. Please do introduce yourself when you take the floor. Also, if you want to address questions directly, let me know, please.
Hi, I'm Rosalina from Withdrawal. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. And I was wondering regarding the efforts undertaken by the US to reform the Human Rights Council, especially in the last year. Nikki Haley said that in closed door there was a lot of countries agreeing, but that nobody had the courage to stand up. So I was wondering, how true do you think it is, and what was the substance of the proposal of the reforms?
Should we collect a few, or so? Yes, collecting some remarks, and then we'll get back to that. So please, others. Okay, the collection will take a little bit of time, so I'll yes, please.
Just one question about the reactions from the civil society in the US. There were a lot of press statements from several networks and groups from the US, and which will be the impact on the domestic issues, which is like, you think that this is also a message to how they are going to fulfill this obligation on domestic issues in the country? And another question will be, I understand that there was like an intention from the ambassador of the US in New York, Nikki Haley, to bring some of the discussions on human rights to the Security Council, like in the case of Venezuela. Now that the US is not part of the Human Rights Council, do you think that they are going to still try to put some of the issues of human rights in other countries at the Security Council?
Thank you very much. I'll give that back to both of you. Also, I think, I don't know who wants to start. Do you want to go first?
Okay. So after Nikki Haley came through Geneva, she initiated a reform conversation both here in Geneva and also in the General Assembly in New York, focusing on these issues of excessive attention on Israel and the process for electing members to the council and so on and so forth. And she said in her statement that, as you said, that behind closed doors many countries agreed, but no one would support the U.S. in public. I mean, I think there are many countries who genuinely think that the Human Rights Council has serious problems as a genuine human rights body, and it clearly does. I mean, it clearly does. We have to be honest about that. And if you were going to design your ideal human rights institution, it would not be the Human Rights Council. It would also not be the treaty body system, right? I mean, we are dealing with, necessarily dealing with imperfect institutions, and the question is, should the best be the enemy of the good, or is an institution so completely flawed as to just be abandoned? And this is what the U.S. is saying about the Human Rights Council. I'm not persuaded, and I think that the other countries that share U.S. concerns about the Council aren't persuaded that the way to deal with them is to walk away from the Council either. So I think that the resistance that she got, and again, I wasn't privy to these conversations, but I think that the resistance she got was probably to the sort of half-baked reform effort that, you know, that she was initiating, as opposed to sort of a serious long-term commitment to a reform process here in Geneva that has been ongoing. With respect to moving human rights issues to the Security Council, that's certainly what she said, right? It's certainly what she said. She said, we couldn't get the Human Rights Council to do something on Venezuela because Venezuela is a member of the Human Rights Council, but followed by golly, we did really well with Venezuela in the Security Council. And so, you know, we're going to go back to New York where we can really influence things. But of course, there are, you know, 5 members with vetoes in the Security Council, and the Security Council hasn't been able to take action on Syria as a result of that. So there are certainly issues that get permanently blocked in the Security Council, and I wouldn't say that it's a perfect human rights institution either. On the point about NGO reaction in the U.S., I'm not sure I fully understood the question, so maybe I can come back to you. There was an important and prominent statement by 18 international NGOs, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, Open Society, and etc., that expressed, I think, appropriate dismay at the U.S. decision, while acknowledging some of the limitations of the Council, also emphasizing the very, very positive and important things that the Council has done, both through commissions of inquiry and in protecting human rights defenders, and through special procedures mechanisms, thematic and country-based, and so forth, and the extent to which these mechanisms have been deployed in the interests of the United States and its values over the last decade. So obviously the human rights NGO community in the United States is very upset about this. I think that the most that is known about the Human Rights Council in the United States is that it's hostile to Israel. I mean, in fact, when I say I'm on the Human Rights Committee, people are like, oh, well, but what do you do about Israel? And I'm like, well, so, you know, and I'd say, what, it's maybe 5% of the American population that knows that. So it's not like this has a huge amount of political traction domestically in the United States. But let me...
No, I think that,
okay.
that was the point, yes.
This is a rarefied conversation domestically in the United States.
Some other NGO from the US I would want to call on you also later, but Camelia, maybe also back to you on the claim of Ms. Haley that actually the Friends did not support them sufficiently. I heard also from some diplomats here in Geneva they were not very happy about that statement. Think of the Dutch initiatives, that you could say some words on that support actually that was there in the process.
Exactly. This is about this draft resolution, which is called Improving the Effectiveness of the Human Rights Council. So the debate is quite technical, really. I would not even elaborate here. You're welcome to come to the training project, which we organize every year in January, you know, so we can elaborate there at the Academy. But right now, I can just agree with Sarah about what she said. And now this resolution is ongoing. It's in the General Assembly. I have the feeling also on other times, based on analysis of what happened until now, that the system, the multilateral system of the human rights and in general is auto-regulating itself. It has happened in the past, as you mentioned, the resolution on defamation of religion, which was a very contentious resolution for many years at the General Assembly and in Geneva in parallel. And one beautiful day, and this I will join you to say, with the very strong, action, constructive action of the Obama administration in 2011, the system itself found a solution. So the defamation of religion in 2011 ceased to exist, and was transformed in a consensual resolution. I don't remember the name, but it was about religious tolerance, etc. So to come back to this, what can I say, in my optimistic mood, I would think that the system would regulate itself. In a probably more pessimistic mood, this could be that now with this noisy withdrawal back again, this would not happen immediately, but this will take time. As far as I know, Mr. Trump could be president only 8 years at the maximum. So, yes, 134 days he will not be unless he changes the constitution like other leaders done it before. Just for the Security Council, we can inform also Ambassador Kelly that the Security Council is already largely dealing with human rights. To the extent where I have interviewed here a Geneva-based Western ambassador, and this person told to me that because the Security Council is very much blocked on other issues like Syria and others, it has returned itself slowly but surely to something like an ersatz, as German says, a bad copy of the Human Rights Council. So I don't really share this opinion, but this is to say that the Security Council is already dealing with human rights. I would say, exactly like Sarah, it's not probably the ideal or at least the better forum than the Human Rights Council. Main difference is that 5 countries has a veto. So for them, this makes a difference. For the humanity, I don't think so.
Thank you. Opening the next round, I had one request already here. Please go ahead.
So this kind of relates to your final remark, Familia, about the 8-year administration, and I'm just wondering on a more practical level, what do you think is required, if anything at all, under the current administration for things to change? Do you see any prospects of things changing under the current administration?
Changing in the attitude towards the council, or changing?
To the table.
Okay, I'm taking another one.
Okay. Just a few comments. First of all, on the UPR, one thing that maybe is worth drawing attention to, it's not a requirement of the Human Rights Council, it's a requirement of the General Assembly. So if the United States wants to walk away from actually being reviewed under the UPR, it's walking away from the General Assembly resolution that comes on review of all states. There's a lot of crocodile tears in what the United States says. The going after clean slates, well, the last 2 times the United States has been elected to the Council, it was on a clean slate. And the first time, there was pressure on New Zealand to withdraw to create that clean slate. Venezuela, there's nothing that would have prevented the United States from bringing a resolution. But enough said, other than to say there are a lot of crocodile tears out there. But I wonder if this isn't, and this is more political than legal, but is this an opportunity to rethink in a positive way what might be done in the Council? The Council spends a lot of time on Sudan, resolution after resolution after resolution, nothing much changes. Iran, it doesn't even have a substantive resolution, it has a procedural resolution. Renew the mandate of the special rapporteur, but again, year after year after year, and the complaint nothing changes. Thailand, there was the military takeover. The Thais sent immediately their deputy foreign minister to come explain that this was just a step on the way to a true democracy. The Council did nothing to keep that dialogue going, nothing to keep any pressure or encouragement going in connection with Thailand. And I'm using that more as an example. But might this be an opportunity to really rethink the way the Human Rights Council does some of its human rights diplomacy, recognizing there will always be a call for a resolution on Syria and Myanmar and North Korea, as perhaps should be, but perhaps more energy can be put into human rights diplomacy dealing with the Thailands, perhaps the Venezuelas 5-10 years ago. Maybe now it's beyond the pale, but rethinking the way it works.
And I just want to build on that, and thank you for bringing it forward. What we've noticed specifically with this particular session of the Council, because they left on the second day that the Council opened, certain polarizations that were occurring quite frequently, and of the nature of US against Russia, especially in the tabling of amendments. Well, action started today, and we've seen a lot of amendments being withdrawn right before action, and a lot less of the very antagonistic discussions that would have occurred otherwise because of that polarization just kind of dissipate. And so perhaps it opens the ground to just kind of have a broader discussion about how we lead those negotiations and what those resolutions are going to end up looking like in the next session in September.
Thank you. Specific questions and also very broad questions going into the general political direction, but I'll hand it to both of you. Which ones you want to pick up and reply?
Just to support this was precisely what I was giving as an example with this new resolution on firearms and others. And yes, it's true. Now, again, don't want to absolutely speculate and to say that Russia came this morning and withdraw the amendments, because until yesterday there were no withdrawn. We agree. So it might be the final fruit of a discussion. We stay serious, but it's true in general terms. What you said is that, and this as well, I was saying, sort of a positive effect that polarization is likely to diminish. Now, if this will think to rethink, if this will lead to rethinking multilateral diplomacy, we can hope so. But I'm afraid this is not the only condition, so it doesn't go straightforward. US withdrawal, polarization is lower, so we can discuss. Because I would argue that Russia, China, and others, and Russia, as you know, is not member of the Human Rights Council, but already contributes to this polarization very, very hugely. So much more is needed, I would say. But you are right in a general sense of the comments.
So just on this issue, I completely agree with Camelia. I mean, I think that the removal of the U.S. will mean that the U.S. is removed as an obstacle on certain resolutions, on certain legal and political issues, and may also alter the behavior of other members in reducing polarization of certain types. But other polarizations that the U.S. was hoping to overcome, for example, regional polarizations may resurrect, and the fundamental opportunity, which I agree is presented. I mean, Amnesty International issued a statement and said on the upside, maybe the positive thing to come out of this is that it actually will help focus attention on the need for reform in the Council in a genuine way, more so than there has been before. The problem is who will exercise the leadership to accomplish that. That's a very, very heavy lift, right? I mean, we tried to reform the Commission, we got the Council with some bells and whistles, reconfigured, but fundamental structural redesign is a very, very difficult thing to accomplish. What would be required for the U.S. to re-engage with the Human Rights Council under this administration? Well, one, John Bolton needs to leave. I think that I think it's extremely unlikely to happen that we would re-engage. The only thing that I can imagine would be if Netanyahu picks up a phone and calls Donald Trump and says, look, we really need you in the Human Rights Council. And then the U.S. concocts some, the Council has reformed itself in various ways along the way that we had always insisted, and therefore we won and we can come back to the Human Rights Council or something like that. But it seems very, very unlikely to me. I mean, the real question will be, now that the U.S. has officially left in the middle of a term, what will be the process that it has to go through internally in order to persuade the bureaucratic institution to re-engage at some future point under some future administration? Because, the inertia, once you move the ship of state in a different direction, the inertia then is moving you in that direction, and it takes some work to bring you back.
Just to reinforce this, probably in the same direction, I also, but you're more expert, I also do not see this Trump administration being really keen and adamant on important issues. They, outside the Human Rights Council, they doesn't look, at least externally, as people having a strong human rights agenda on anything. Because this could be potentially a trigger. And another example under the Bush and Clinton administration, Hillary Clinton, she came to Geneva, she came multiple times, she came to the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council with a very strong agenda. I don't remember everything, but this was, you know, a big breakthrough on the rights of LGBTI in the Human Rights Council. And I think we can reasonably argue that if the US, because LGBTI is something which was, you know, turning around under the Commission on Human Rights, under the Human Rights Council. It was a resolution by Brazil, withdrawn, by South Africa, withdrawn. It was really, you know, the big elephant behind the corner. And then Obama and Clinton, I remember her coming here, they put, you know, the whole strategy on this, and they did a breakthrough on this topic and other topics, obviously, on this. Now, for this, you must have a strong human rights agenda on some issues, and not just object and deny. So I'm not hopeful that this will happen, because I don't, unless you correct me, I don't think they have a strong human rights agenda on something.
The flip side of the question is, what would it take to get the U.S. to really just abandon, you know, OHCHR, the treaty body system, everything? And I think that is probably, at the moment, it wouldn't take that much, right? And so this may be a controversial thing to say, but this is not a good time for a special rapporteur to do a major report fingering the United States on anything. I mean, I'm as open to criticism of the United States as anyone. There clearly is poverty in the United States, and there's no reason that, you know, someone shouldn't make that point clearly and distinctly. But the political engagement right now, I would say, is extremely fragile. And if you want to just, you know, give someone in the White House an excuse to say, well, let's just throw the whole thing out, throw out the baby with the bathwater, it wouldn't be hard.
Yes, we'll come to the next round. I also want to invite again, if we have US NGOs to say something, even if that goes a little bit now beyond our first scope of the legal implications. So yes, please.
Yes, I was wondering, legally speaking, do you think that the US withdrawal can produce any effect on the commitments already assumed by the state, for instance, before the Human Rights Council in the UPR? I mean, legally speaking, not politically, although we don't know really what's the US position on this. Can the US invoke this as an argument for not presenting, for instance, the midterm reports?
So that round, should we come back, or should we just get the technical question? Because I think, well, the UPR midterm report already is not an obligation, and the same goes also, I think, for the UPR commitments that you undertake, that they're not legal obligations. So therefore, I mean, it is definitely a legal question, but I think from the legal side, so no, not that much of change. From the political side, obviously, if you walk away from that body, I think it can have its ramifications, but there is, in the first instance, not a legal obligation created anyway.
So I have more of a question about how the U.S. will think in the future, because I feel like for me as an American, I worry a lot about the effect that Trump will have on U.S. in general in 10, 20 years. And so I wonder a lot about whether or not the U.S. can basically come back from something like this. Like in 10 years, if let's say we have a new president, someone else, or just a new administration in general, could they go back into the Human Rights Council with, I guess not a lack of trust among other countries, but could they go back in with a clean slate, for lack of a better way to phrase it?
The reply is yes. The reply is yes.
There might be a little more to say on that, but yes.
Yeah.
Just collecting a few again, sorry.
I was just wondering if we were not still a bit underestimating this move of the Trump administration, because it has to be seen, we're just focusing on the council, but it has to be seen in the wider aspect of the general withdrawals of multilateral bodies. And I don't think it's just an issue of, oh, I don't like the multilateral bodies and the question of sovereignty, as we've been saying. I think there's even worse behind. How an administration can tear down the best ever reached agreement on nuclear controls to afterwards take the most stupid agreement you could think, which he did in Singapore. It's not because Trump is stupid, and I think that's a real mistake. Because his belief, John Bolton's belief, it's all part of a school of thought. It's the issue of power. If I'm strong, if I'm powerful, I'll win. As easy as that. So all of these small issues of getting controls and UN people checking, we don't care about. We have to be the big ones in the game. We have to be very strong. The other ones will be afraid, and that's how you got it. So there's a philosophy behind it, which means the worst is still to come. So when we're saying would they withdraw their funds from the office or whatever strategy, probably they're going to do that. Probably. And they wait for a time where it's possible to have a lot of publicity around, because it's very useful internally speaking, because people will say, oh great, they're still acting on these type of issues and they're still very good. And we'll see other type of dramatic withdrawal. I mean, even within NATO, they are worried, saying, you know, how long are we going to continue with NATO? And then you see that you have alliances. But really strong ones. The allies of Trump administration, it's the Putin administration, it's the Xi Jinping administration. So you see something else starting to be building up. Of course, it's the very first step. We don't know if he's going to make it. But I think there is a clear philosophy behind it. So to continue what Peter has said, I think we should see this not as, oh, can we still have a possibility not to move too much, keep on going and do our small resolutions? No. I think Peter is right. This should be a wake-up call, and then we should see, do we still have states around here who believe in the rule of law, who think that you can solve issues in the world in a different way than just through war, through having a stronger military budget, more armaments, stop about the more industrial competition, stop about environmental issues, all these, you know, these type of small games, and here real politics. And I think that, yes, that's exactly what we should be calling in the NGO community as well as states who are concerned, those who still believe in the rule of law, which is the very basis for the whole system that we have since 1945. So that's what is actually targeted. The legal system and the political system that has been built in the Second World War, that is the target of the Bolton guys and all of these type of currents. That's what they are going after. So if we want to defend human rights and not the rest, the whole thing is a battle of the rule of law. And that, I think, yes, if we call for this, I think we will find a number of states and a number of people around the world who agree with that. They don't want it. Probably the reaction we have here is just because we assume, yes, of course, we're still trying to see how can we work on the rule of law and how can we make this mechanism work and continue to work. But that's exactly what is targeted. So let's not miss their point. We should indeed have an alliance now with the states who are concerned with the rule of law, and not just to see how we're going to change a few things from the decisions that were taken in the GA and, you know, the building block of the Human Rights Council. I think the challenge is much bigger than that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the discussion. I work for the OECHR, my name is Claudia. I just want to ask a question about the multilateral system, and because this is not the first time actually the US is going after the UN or the mechanisms. We saw it last year with the peacekeeping missions Haiti and now Congo. The reforms of the system, also the withdrawals, the few number of withdrawals and coming back to the system, etc. Do you not see it actually as a form of bullying of the multilateral system? How do you see it actually, like, especially in this administration?
More for you.
So
my answer to your question was this, which is, I mean, I think the narrow question, you know, if the U.S. in 10 years had a completely different president, a completely different administration, you know, re-embraced multilateral institutions and multilateral engagement, would the international community take the U.S. back? Absolutely, because it can't afford not to, right? And that's exactly what happened with Obama and Bush, right? That was that transition. The question is, what will be the state of those institutions at that point? And I think that is really the concern. I do think that this is part of a concerted effort to dismantle multilateral and regional institutions. I think, just if you look at the list, since he took office, he essentially curtailed American participation in UNESCO, the UN Population Fund, the UN Global Compact on Migration. Then he pulled out of the Human Rights Council. He slashed funding for the Palestinian Relief Agency. He's pushed for cuts of the overall UN budget and the separate budget for peacekeeping. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. He tore up the Iran nuclear pact. Now he's trying to undermine the ability of other parties to that agreement to participate. He campaigns consistently against NATO, the G7, and the European Union, and NAFTA. He has harshly insulted leaders of just about every democratic rule of law state you can think of: Germany, Australia, Britain, Canada, Iran, Mexico, not Macron yet. And embraced and applauded the president of the Philippines, Putin, Orban, Kaczynski, Erdogan, right? So this is clearly a pattern, and it's not funny. It's quite dangerous. And the question is, what is the coalition of like-minded states and allies to counterbalance that, right? Because the coalition of authoritarian inclined states, the loose coalition is empowered. And meanwhile, the UK is off, inspecting its navel on Brexit, and Merkel is trying to keep her own government together, and Italy and Spain are causing trouble for the EU, and Macron is like trying to keep his fingers in all the dike holes. And everyone is it's sort of a divide and conquer strategy for dismantling the EU, among other things. Not to be optimistic.
Just for the multilateralism sake of the story, from the beginning of the Council, actually, the fact that EU, which is 27, 28, whatever you count, is acting as one voice in the Human Rights Council and elsewhere is not always helpful, because this voice of the EU goes to the, sometimes, not to say usually, to the lowest common denominator, and we have seen this very often in the Human Rights Council at the beginning. And just an anecdote, the agenda, which is now so contested today with this, 10 points, the agenda of the Human Rights Council has 10 points, has the Israel and has the other state countries, entirely under the responsibility of the Western states, because at the time the Human Rights Council was created, the agenda, the first year, if you go back into the memory, was composed of 3 issues, and this was the idea of the first president, de Alba. And the issues were organizational issues, then a common point which was supposed to go in under points in all the human rights, and a voting point. So this was not contentious at this time. And then Western countries, European Union, with the lowest common denominator at this time, I will not mention who was at the presidency, you can discover this back in the time, said that they want an agenda with particular countries. Now the point 4, which says country situations, and that actually brought back the item on Israel, etc. So it's also necessary before being completely panicked and say that's the end of everything, to look back a little bit on some questions, how they come, how we can do better in the future, why can't we go back to this? Because the Human Rights Council has functioned 1 year 1 year with a different agenda, the very first year. The agenda, you know, today with Israel and etc., it's as of the second year of the Human Rights Council. So it's a complex reflection also, obviously including the worry about erosion of the multilateral diplomacy, but not only.
The next round. Comments and questions?
They're too depressed.
When levels now depressed on the global level, a little bit more optimistic sometimes on the technical level actually, so inviting questions on the technical level. Further comments? Yes, please.
Thank you. In the technical level, but I wanted to know, since we were talking about John Bolton's sort of threat, and also about, again, multilateralism and everything. So they explained last week, I think, or in these days, that they were going to pull out the WTO. So
Pull out
the WTO.
Oh,
So
right.
do you think, given the record already that we've seen, that is possible, or is possible that they will do it? I know that it's not necessarily linked to human rights directly, but they do discuss other things that are kind of linked to it, like the TRIPS agreement that has to do with health, for example. So I was wondering, do you think they will go through with it?
Maybe also to add to this one, I guess it's also that we also in the WTO, I think, saw already obstruction in terms of the dispute settlement mechanism. So it's not all of a sudden that it would need the human rights aspects to get in. I think it's what maybe was mentioned by Eve also, that overall anti-multilateralism approach that we see already in the dispute settlement mechanism being blocked, and now maybe with a future step, but don't want to keep you from commenting on that.
No, the U.S. joined the WTO because it thought that the U.S. would win in the WTO in trade disputes against other countries, right? And it hasn't actually worked out that way, at least not as consistently as the U.S. wanted. And you know, the concern that John Bolton articulated vis-a-vis the Human Rights Council applies equally to the WTO, which is that it's a forum that treats all states equally, right? And this is the basic offensive feature of multilateral institutions, that they treat all states equally. They treat the US and Iran the same way, and how can that possibly be, right? So could it happen? Yes. I mean, just about anything could happen. You know, I mean, before Paris and before Iran, you know, there was a lot of discussion, at least domestically in the United States, that he was, you know, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. You know, that was all Sturm und Drang, and he wouldn't really do it. And ultimately, the business community would stop him on Paris, and the business community and our allies would stop him on Iran, and so on and so forth. But those proved not to be true in both cases, right? And I mean, the sideshow of North Korea and the vacuous, you know, pretend agreement with North Korea is just a distraction for him to claim that he's accomplished something internationally. But it's part and parcel of the same message, which is he doesn't really care about the content, right? He doesn't really care about the content, and he doesn't listen to people. Maybe he won't listen to John Bolton either. Hopefully.
That's nearly to end on a positive note. I'll take the last round of questions, so if you have been holding back your question, please pose it now, and then we'll get back to the panel and we close this evening's discussion. So yes, please, I'll start with you.
Hi, thank you for the discussion. Maris Turdi, Academy alumna. I was just wondering how long until John Bolton gets fired?
Getting to really concrete questions.
Well, the shortest tenure was, what, 28 days in the White House, so.
Further questions? Comments? Yes, please, Peter.
Thanks for letting me ask a second question. I'm asking this question to you as a member of the Human Rights Committee. How much of what we're seeing in a very extreme form with the Trump government in the United States reflects a diminishment of the attachment to human rights more generally? One thinks of the Bill of Rights discussion in the UK. Guterres, in an interview on Russia Today, described the Human Rights Council and UNESCO without mentioning, said one or two areas, but as peripheral activities. UNDP is scaling back significantly on its human rights work. And we can go around the world, the Philippines, wherever. But from what you see as a member of the Human Rights Committee, is there a much bigger problem?
Other points before we close the question session? No, it's not. Well, then I'll give you that possibility to end the evening on a very positive and optimistic note, following the question of Peter. Please, both of you.
I think it certainly made it easier. I think that the overall diminishment of global commitment to human rights among UN member states and including among leading governments, including in Europe, made it easier for the US to withdraw from the Human Rights Council and discredit a major human rights body. In the Human Rights Committee, I mean, I have colleagues here who can certainly express their own views, but we don't really see it, I would say, so much in country examinations. The place where we see it is in the discussion of the treaty body strengthening process, where there is increasingly from countries like Russia and China pointed skepticism about, exceeding our mandate and trying to micromanage the treaty body system and diminish its effectiveness in various ways on the one hand, but on the other hand, and perhaps even more painfully, the lack of friendly states that are actually out there aggressively supporting and fighting, the Denmarks and so forth that 5 years ago would have been major friends of the human rights system, now politically, domestically are very ambivalent about multilateral human rights institutions, and that's a double whammy that is concerning.
I'm not sitting in the Human Rights Council, but I can return you the question, and I have no answer to this, but is the Convention on the Rights of the Child less good or weaker because the US has never been member of this? It's probably difficult to assess just one thing like this separately. Open question.
Well, the great irony is the one treaty body review that you actually had under this administration was before the Committee on the Rights of the Child, right? Under the two optional protocols, because we are party to the optional protocols. Yes.
So, to me, these are open questions. I don't have a straightforward answers. If we get to straightforward answers, then we speak like Nikki Haley. I just reread back again, and I advise you to read back again the reply she gave to this 18 NGOs who urged the United States not to do so. It's very, again, it's this straightforward language, which we thought under Bush we were horrified because Bush was speaking about good guys, bad guys all the time. Now we almost pressure him that he was an establishment man.
Right.
Anyway, so
Who would have thought?
Exactly.
Longing for the days.
Yes. An establishment. Bad guy, but establishment man.
Okay. Well, I see we do have this very positive note to end on. Oh, my dear. Obviously, we do not have those answers. We leave a lot of those questions hanging in the air, but I think that was still a very interesting and informative debate tonight. I would like to thank all of you for your contributions. Especially thank you both for the presentations and all the replies to very difficult questions, going from very particular technical details to big questions, philosophical questions about the state of the world. We will continue that discussion shortly, and thank you all for having participated tonight.